You're watching the Next Level Construction Management Podcast, celebrating unapologetic greatness, proudly promoting meritocracy, and daring to be different by design. Here's your host, Rob Crum, ready to take your construction management performance to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast, taking your construction management performance to the next level. Special show today. I'm recording this on Mother's Day, so this is a very special Mother's Day edition. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Special happy Mother's Day to my beautiful wife, who is an absolutely amazing mother to our kids, trying to keep them occupied and quiet right now so I can record this. Also, happy Mother's Day to my mom in heaven, watching down on me and my family. And also, happy Mother's Day to my mother-in-law, who we are beyond grateful for all that she does for us. First, let me apologize for my voice. If I cough, have to clear my throat, take a drink, I'm fine. There's just a unique blend of Texas in the air that is not getting along with my body. God bless Texas, but damn the allergies. But I am fine. It's great to be back. Hope everyone had an amazing week. I am fired up for this episode. This is going to be one of the most important topics that I've got to. This is a great example, another one of the law of counterintuitiveness. And again, highlights the importance of adopting and implementing that just because it's not my job doesn't mean it won't be my problem mentality. Now, viewing this from that two sides of the coin perspective, on one hand, I'll say it's unfortunate that the majority of construction managers take, in my opinion, the incorrect approach on this. And the rare exceptions who lean my way on this at all, maybe 5 to 10% of PMs, they generally take a position of mere acknowledgement. And if they do manage this to any degree, it's done at a very cursory level and not nearly to the extent that will maximize your project's success. But on the other side of that coin, this is another great case study of status quo management versus next level management. And it does present another amazing opportunity for us to continue to separate ourselves from our colleagues, from our competition, and excel to a degree that our clients are not accustomed to seeing. So, what is the secret sauce we're putting in the next level stew today? It's going to be an intense focus on identifying and subsequently managing of certain key words. I'm going to call them red flag words that are both subconsciously and consciously. We've almost been brainwashed to take a position where phrases like, I don't have to worry about that. That's not my responsibility, so just ignore it. Or simply stated, that's not us. These statements have become too commonplace and unfortunately both expected and accepted. So let's identify what those red flag words are and discuss the paramount importance of taking the next level position in managing them. Next.
All
right, let me be crystal clear here. I'm calling them red flag words, but to manage them differently will require a paradigm shift, since these words are typically looked at by most, and not only my managers, but contractors in general. This is a global issue within our industry, that these words are looked at not as red flags, but conversely as ignore words or not me words. So it's very frustrating to me because it's not even that they're overlooked. They are not overlooked. They are almost always noticed. Hell, in most cases, they're identified on a general contractor's bid, usually within the qualifications, clarifications, and exclusions. So it is an intentional and deliberate position of non-management. So please understand that I am intentionally and deliberately pointing them out in an attempt to emphasize their absolute importance to managing successful projects. All right, hopefully I've set the table for this topic sufficiently, but first, corporate disclaimer. The opinions expressed on this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not represent those of any former or current employers. All right, Team GST, please go get your pens, your paper, be ready to jot these items down, because this information will absolutely have a direct, significant, and immediate impact on the success of your projects. All right, here they are. These are the words, acronyms, phrases, notes, etc. that you'll see on plans that you need to laser beam focus on identifying and then subsequently managing. Existing to remain, ETR, existing to relocate, existing, reuse, salvage, by others, by owner vendor, by tenant, by tenant vendor, by AV vendor, IT vendor, by signage vendor, by furniture vendor, by security vendor, a by others variation of any of those. Security by others, AV by others, special inspections, permits by others. Now, obviously, every set of plans is different, so the exact verbiage may differ slightly from what I just noted, but I think you get the idea. This is basically going to be any scope of work, permits, licenses, inspections, etc., that are noted in any way as not by the general contractor. Those are the red flag words we want to zero in on. All right, pause the show. I can already see some people scratching their heads out there. Wait. You want us to laser beam focus on identifying and managing items that specifically say are not our responsibility. Well, I already said it was counterintuitive, so yes, because these are the words, these are the topics that if not identified, coordinated, and managed as part of your overall build out, can and in most cases will absolutely sabotage your project. And the negative effects, they are not typically felt until the end of the project. Just coming out of nowhere, blindsiding you like one of those old crackback blocks by my man Hines Ward. All right, quick video clip here. So go get your popcorn out. Watch this video to illustrate this point. So I'm going to do a voiceover here. So there's Hines Ward. He's going to play the part of the ignored red flag issue. Those red flag words. And number 55, you're going to see in a moment. Not sure of his name. I'll actually be surprised if he knows his name after this hit. He's going to play the role of your project. So there's Hines. Okay. Oh! Ouch. Yeah. All right. Let's watch this again. Hold on. I think we're going to get a replay. Oh, yeah, there's your project. Yeah, you didn't really pay attention to what that was. Here we go. That's what you're ignoring. Here comes your project. That's, like the old, this is your brain on drugs. That's your project. That's your project. Ignoring red flag words. Yeah, I'd go to commercial break on that too. Okay, so your project takes a hit like that. And then what? Now you have a room full of people, the general contractor, owner, tenant, client, CM, architect, everyone, all looking at each other, trying to figure out how this happened. Who's to blame? Who's paying for what? Now we have potential for what items? Liquidated damages, rescheduling those owner and tenant vendors, which if anyone has had to do, that's a whole nother topic. Potentially final inspection delays, rework of already completed work in a finished space. What if the tenant is already scheduled to move out of their existing space and is unable to extend staying there? So not moving into their space is not an option. This isn't 2020 anymore where everyone was just working from home. They obviously had their space built with the intent of moving staff in. All right, so now let's add weekend work, post-movement work, overtime. Are there going to be extended general conditions? Who's paying for those? And who's paying for the rework costs? I could keep going, but I think I made my point. All of these issues, a damn near infinite number of possibilities and problems with an extremely small amount of potential solutions. And what solutions are available aren't going to be very good. So you have all these people in a room trying to figure this out and get it resolved. Probably not a room in a very good mood or where people are very happy with each other. Yeah, that's just the way you want to finish your project. Fantastic. So now that we've looked at what can and often does happen, let's talk in more detail about how to avoid this and put our projects on a trajectory for success. Now, to simplify our discussion, I'm going to put these red flag words into 3 buckets. First, we're going to have the existing bucket. It's going to include existing to remain, ETR, existing to relocate, reuse, salvage, anything like that. Next is the by others bucket. Here, obviously, we're going to have by others, but then by owner, by tenant, by owner or tenant vendor, by AV, IT, signage, furniture, and those any by others variations of those, security by others, AV by others. And then last, we're going to have the permits, inspections, third-party bucket. Now, this bucket's going to have some standalone aspects, but it's also going to have some overlap with the by others bucket. So for today's episode, we're going to focus our talk on bucket number 1, the existing bucket, where I'm going to use some examples to solidify the importance of incorporating managing these words into our best practices. So we're going to table the remaining buckets for next week's episode. So bucket number 1, existing, which again is going to include existing to remain, ETR, existing to relocate, reuse, salvage, anything like that. Now, we all know that an evergreen idea on this show is that we want to manage to constructability, form, and function. And I know from experience that for every 100 items or issues I identify in a project, probably upwards of 80, 90% or more I'm able to identify via the submittal review process. So that knowledge tells me one clear fact, that in order to identify 80, 90+% of issues on the project, I need to know, number 1, what is intended on being installed. And number 2, I need to receive or retrieve the information, product data, installation instructions, samples for those materials in order to identify the potential issues. Forget about constructability, form, and function for a minute. At a rudimentary level, the whole point of the submittal process is to at least confirm what is being proposed for installation meets the design intent for what is on the plans and specs. And this is typically confirmed by ensuring at a minimum that the manufacturer model number for the specified material matches what the subcontractor submitted for approval and subsequent installation. And I'll add this to the minimum. This is also done with the generally understood belief that what has been designed will largely meet the constructability, form, and function standard. And honestly, hats off to our designers, because in my experience, I'd say that it does, and probably to a high degree. But if only 10 to 20% of what is designed fails to meet that standard in some manner, that is where those issues in items log and the constructability, form, function, submittal review is so important. And that is where the disconnect is, trying to align and reconcile these two management standards, because the latter, that status quo industry standard, allows, it almost invites the opportunities for these red flag word problems. Now, I know that the plans and specs probably have general notes stating that it's the GC's job to coordinate these existing and other red flag word items. But that is why the general contractor has learned to CYA themselves and combat against these notes via their bids, qualifications, clarifications, and exclusions. So we end up in this laissez-faire, ignorance is bliss mentality of management and take the position that generally speaking was designed, will work, and that we're only obligated to submit and review for those new materials that we are proposing to install. So that obviously leaves anything in the existing bucket hanging out there with the cowboy riding on an ostrich, the jelly squirting water pistol, and the Charlie in the box on the island of misfit toys. Just going off hopes and dreams that these items won't have issues. No confirmation that they'll actually work. No coordination with the plans, field conditions, or integration with the new materials. Just fingers crossed management. But because I know that, and I'll use these ballpark figures we just discussed, that about 15% of problems will occur off the design drawings. And I know that I can identify, on average, 85% of those via the submittal process. All right, but how am I going to identify issues for materials on the island of misfit toys? Those materials that I'm just ignoring. And I'd say the propensity to have an issue with those materials is significantly higher than 15%. Because the architect, because they have those general notes, is likewise going to take the, oh, it's existing, so I'm just going to note it as such and move on mindset. So the risk factor for issues with these items is exponential to everything else, but we've allowed it to become industry standard to ignore them. Seriously, let's go back and implement the say it out loud test again here. Let me repeat what I just said and really let this sink in. The risk factor for these existing items is exponential to everything else, but we've allowed it to become industry standard to ignore the pre-installation management of them. Is it any wonder why the confidence I have in my approach is so high, as I consistently avoid these issues and others constantly fall victim to them? Now, this is not any chest puffery or, ooh, look at me. Honestly, I could care. But given the context of what we're discussing, it's important to note my track record over the past 8 years since I've been implementing this approach. And that track record is beyond reproach on this topic. It is truly something where I have been able to avoid catastrophic issues and also provide amazing recommendations during my build-outs. All right, let's talk turkey here. Give some quick examples to illustrate the risk of ignoring and value of focusing on these red flag words. All right, existing to remain, ETR, existing, reuse. Couple quick examples here. All right, how about an interior build out that includes renovating a pantry with the existing component being the appliances, including a new side-by-side style refrigerator. So the entire pantry is getting redone, but the general overall footprint and layout is going to remain the same, with the only significant change being that the pantry was open from both sides of the space previously, kind of like a galley-style kitchen, but now one side is going to get closed off by extending that existing shallow wall next to the refrigerator out to the opposite wall. Then the entire pantry is going to get rebuilt with all new finishes, flooring, ceilings, cabinets, countertops, but those appliances, including that newer refrigerator, will be reinstalled. Now, anyone that's familiar with this situation knows that typically as early as the bid stage via a pre-bid RFI, it's probably going to be confirmed that the tenant's going to remove and store the appliances prior to construction starting, and then we'll bring them back whenever the GC asks. Okay, that's easy enough. Now, this refrigerator, it's a standard 36-inch wide and sitting in a 40-inch opening between the cabinets and that shallow wall. So it had one door opening next to the cabinets and the other against that shallow wall. And it's going back into the same 40-inch opening. And we'll still have one door opening to the cabinets, but the other door, now it's going to open against that fully extended wall. All right. What's your point, Rob? It's a 36-inch wide refrigerator going back into a 40-inch opening. You know what? You're right. Let me just grab a drink and don't worry about it. But actually, how about for the sake of due diligence, let's not ignore it. And let's check it for full constructability, form, and function. So let's go ahead and request the manufacturer model number. You might even have to drive over to where it's being stored and get that information yourself. No big deal, you can get that. And then let's look up its product data and installation instructions. Yep, looky. The door won't open fully, and now you can't get those trays out. Good luck every time someone spills their Tupperware and the liquid from whatever was in it spills everywhere. Not going to be an inconvenience at all that they're going to have to pull out the entire refrigerator every single time this happens. And we all know it's going to happen a lot. But if you identify this early, you could have adjusted the location of the wall, adjusted the size of the adjacent cabinets, ordered a new refrigerator, whatever. A lot of possible solutions, but catch it too late, and those options are greatly reduced. All right, here's another one. And frankly, this is even more ignored. How about existing copiers and printers going in a new copy room? Now, again, it might be a good idea to find out the manufacturer model number of those. Best case, the physical dimensions were identified and accounted for in the design. But just like that 36-inch refrigerator in the 40-inch opening, the general dimensions of these items might have been accounted for in the design. But what about the bypass tray or the clearances required to pull out and insert paper in the paper trays? Oh, you would be surprised, and I have caught situations where this was reviewed and the functionality of these items would have been significantly impacted had we not addressed it. All right, here's another one. What about a TV in a conference room? All right, again, it's ignored since it's existing. Except you now just failed your final inspection because it protrudes more than 4 inches off the wall. But wait, it wasn't an issue before, and it was just put in 2 years ago when the conference room was renovated with a permit. Oh, shit. Let's go back and look at the pre-bid photos. Fuck. There was a credenza below it, and that was removed. This issue is going to give you a sneak peek into next week's episode where I'm going to discuss coordination with the AV furniture, those tenant vendors and drawings, coordinating them into our build out and the importance of doing so. All right, last one. Let's not forget about the existing to remain ceiling grid example from episode 4. As you recall, the existing lights were oriented in the opposite direction as the new lights. And once we did our due diligence and confirmed where the ceiling grid main was, we realized that we would have to either A, remove and reinstall the entire ceiling grid to allow for the lights to be installed as designed, or we'd have to reinstall the lights in the same direction as they were previously installed. Okay, Moving on, existing to relocate. Here's a couple of things to be aware of. First, how about doors? I can't count the number of times this scenario has been noted wrong. Now, the worst case of it was a project where probably 50 of the overall 60 doors were noted to be relocated. Now, in this instance, we had two different styles of doors. One was a full slab and the other had a vision panel. Then obviously we had the different door swings, but I believe in this case, all the doors were getting new hardware. So we were able to potentially use a right hand where a left hand reverse was, vice versa, and the same for a left hand with a right hand reverse. So simply stated, we had two different door types and two different door swings to account for. And of the 50 doors, after I did a takeoff on what we actually had that was existing and compared it to what was needed, given those variables, we didn't even have 50 options available. I believe we had 40 available, and only half of them were correct as noted on the plans. So we had to rearrange 50% of the doors from how the plans noted them, and then still order another 10 new doors outright. And I've seen this issue where there's been as few as 6 doors where only the door swing was needed to be coordinated, and 2 of them were correct, and 4 new doors were needed to be ordered. But if you looked at the plans, it said take door 205, relocate it to opening 210. Take 204, put it in 207. But of those options, of that direction, only 2 of them were actually possible. And there was no other options to solve the riddle for the other 4. So we had to order 4 new doors. So either on a large or small scale, expect to see this provided to you incorrectly. How about existing to relocate or reuse light fixtures? Now there's a number of items to consider here. Are they compatible with whatever new ceiling they're scheduled to be installed in? If they're going to be dimmed, do they have ballast capable of that? Same goes for daylight harvesting or other lighting control options. If they're being installed in a different location in the space, you could have different ceiling obstructions and conflicts that might be an issue given the fixture dimensions. So that's going to need to be reviewed. Again, the concern lies in the fact that the typical information that you'd typically use to identify the majority of these issues, it's not going to be provided, so you have to find it. That is why it is so critical to work around this and take whatever measures you need to get that information so you can determine what the potential issues may be. Again, so then you're able to get ahead of them with minimal to no cost or schedule impact. All right, one last example. And I actually see this example a lot. It's not always an issue, but this does happen quite often. Existing to relocate VAVs. Wait, what could possibly go wrong here? How about the existing VAVs having a CFM capacity that is significantly different from the design intent of the total of its associated diffusers? Let me explain. So you have a VAV that has 8 supply diffusers noted at 200 CFM each. So that VAV is obviously noted to supply 1,600 total CFM. But the max that VAV is capable of is 500 CFM. See where this is going? And when's this going to be discovered? Probably once you receive your final tab report, after all finishes are in, usually right against substantial completion and tenant move-in. Now, imagine a Class A office space, mainly drywall or other high-end ceilings, wood slats, metal panels, maybe some 3-form ceilings, over brand new carpeting, wood flooring, millwork, conference and office furniture. And now you potentially have to open all of those ceilings up to rectify this. Now, I know what you're thinking. Rob, it's not my first rodeo. When I see existing to remain VAVs, I immediately get the prior tab or I do a pre-tab and send it to the engineer as a submittal for approval. Well, what if I told you I did that before too? And that pre-tab submittal came back stamped approved. But much like I just took a sip of my drink there and said, let's just double check it. I did that in that case too. And boy, am I glad I did. Because after I reviewed it more closely and did a takeoff of all the CFMs and determined that 80% of the specified relocated locations wouldn't work. Again, like the door example, we were able to reassign most of the VAVs to locations that would work, but there were a handful that wouldn't work anywhere. And we ended up having to order new ones for those locations. Overall, crisis averted during the submittal phase. But without that information and without taking the probably half day to entire day to determine what would work and wouldn't and where those things would work, what's the worst case scenario? Yeah, it's just what I described. And it would have been right at the end of the job, opening all of those ceilings up over all brand new finishes. Pro tip here. I would recommend adding a section into your meeting agenda called Owner-Tenant Vendors. And within this, you'll want to add a subsection titled Existing ETR. There, you're going to list out all the items you're expecting to be reused. This is going to give you an easy place to discuss where any of those existing to remain items are going to be stored until they're needed again. What items are expected to be reused and where. You're going to be surprised how many times the owner or tenant is caught off guard by what is being reused. Maybe they thought it was being replaced. Maybe it was supposed to be replaced, and that was an oversight somewhere along the design process. Or maybe the decision to keep it is something the tenant needs to discuss more internally. But taking the time to bullet point what these items are and confirm with the entire team those expectations, that is worth its weight in gold. And honestly, team, I could discuss this all day. Existing to remain toilets. All right, the plans show them wall mounted and the existing are floor mounted. There's obviously a number of issues there we could discuss. Existing sinks, nice drop-in sink being reinstalled in a new solid surface countertop. Are you sure they're not going to want an undermount sink? And you can reverse that. What if they were going to reuse the cabinets and plastic laminate countertop, but put new sinks and fixtures in, and the sink specifies an undermount? That's not going to work. Same goes for furniture, signage, flooring, wall finishes, millwork. Any of these, if not fully reviewed, could present issues on the project. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Really helps support my channel and lets me know what types of topics you enjoy and want to see more of. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please send them to comments.nextlevelmanagement@gmail.com. Also, humble request, please give the show a follow on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Likewise, if you could follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify, I would greatly appreciate it. And last, if you could, please share, repost the videos and reels. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. God bless America. And as always, Team GSD, be relentless.
Thank you for watching the Next Level Construction Management Podcast.